I never grew up with educators that look like myself. So I
100.
feel like honestly, like we are that new wave that make being wise, being smart, being educated cool, right?
Absolutely.
Wisdom is a powerful tool, but oftentimes we might neglect it because of who it's coming from. You feel me? But if we can chop it up with a young buck and really implant a seed, man, like it's more than just education at that point. You know what I'm saying?
What's going on, beautiful people? This is the Let's Grow Together podcast, where diverse individuals and communities come to serve, connect, and grow in areas that they're most passionate about. Back like we never left, brother Marcus. Check in with the people. Let them know how you doing today.
What's going on, family? Good to be back with y'all as always. And as always, we got another banger for y'all today, man. Super solid brother that James will introduce us to shortly. But I'm vibrant as always, man. Another good week under the belt. Looking to make the transition in the role. It's official, on the 13th. So another great opportunity to develop. We're having a session Thursday about lust versus love with the youth, which is always going to be, a good topic. And we're in the midst of just looking into a few grants to expand the impact in the city, bro. So work is always nonstop, man. The ball is rolling. So very good, man. How about yourself, James? How you and the guys?
Hey, man, I'm blessed and highly favored, man. And first and foremost, kudos to you on the transition. I know that this work is more in alignment with the foundation. So I think it'll be a tremendous help with the impact that you and Roots are looking to have. And man, just blessings to you. But man, I'm phenomenal. These Tuesdays be my long days, man. I didn't have 4 different sessions today. But the impact with the youth has been phenomenal. We had another dope session with South Suburban College where um some of the older folks in the group, we were talking about those ABC goals, and it was just super dope just to hear some of the C goals from some of my elders, and just really kind of knowing like the level at which you set your goals, or the bigger your goals, the more I know that you believe in yourself and your abilities. So it was just interesting to hear from some of those older folk. But man, I'm blessed, man. I could talk about this all day, but man, today we got a phenomenal guest. Somebody that's really near and dear to me. He's one of my mentors. And we always quote the great Les Brown and saying sometimes you have to believe in others' belief in you until your belief kicks in. And this was a brother that believed in me when I didn't see the full picture. I didn't see my full potential. But without further ado, I would like to bring on my brother, my mentor, Dr. Byron Martin.
Oh, hello, hello. It's good to be with you, brothers, today. How are y'all doing?
Doing well, man. Appreciate you blessing the space.
Oh, man, it's good to be with y'all and be in time and be able to kick it with James and Marcus and just appreciate what y'all are doing from afar. So I've been inspired by y'all, and the work that you're doing. So I definitely appreciate being able to be in this space with y'all
That's love.
today.
That's love. Well, go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, Byron Martin, originally from Mesquite, Texas, which is on the east side of Dallas. Grew up there. Just a perfect. I always joke, I'm half city and half country, and that's what made it work out in Texas. Um, but grew up there. Went to school out in West Texas, a space called Abilene Christian University. Played football uh, there for years, and then worked there afterwards. The bulk of my work and time there was in multicultural education, multicultural programs. Jumped from there up to um, Northwest Indiana to school, Valparaiso University. That's where I met and connected with James. Was at Valpo, and I was there for about 8 years, different spaces and positions. Started off in multicultural programs, moved up to intercultural and international, where I oversaw not only the center there, but also our international sites, as well as our international students and scholars that are coming in. Ended up as an interim VP for DEI there, and made the move from there to Carnegie Mellon. I think my heart's work is surrounding issues of equity. I think I've always just been one of those people that have been I can't stand people being done wrong. It's like one of those things that when you see it, I get viscerally angry. And according to my parents, I've been that way since I was a kid. Uh, so want to see everybody have what they need to survive and to make it. Especially folks that look like us in this U.S. context. So it's kind of my passion. I still do work connected to ideas of equity, Freedom Recovery Fund, where we're trying to put dollars in the hands of people to make a down payment on a house, get their education, start a business. And so we have some work that we're doing still in Northwest Indiana connected to that. That I'm still connected to just because it's important and good work. So that's a little bit about me.
So I'll go ahead. You got it, brother.
Nah, so let me ask you this, boss. Just hearing you out, right? The DE and multicultural space. How did you find yourself aligning with that, right? I know that's an extremely popular arena now that a lot of people a couple years about didn't really know about, right? So speak on that for me.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I do believe like it's now the new hotness, and I'm like finally, because I was doing it when it wasn't hot, when people were like, "You do what?" When my dad was like, "Hold on, son, you do what?" Like those words don't make any sense. What do you do now? I need to understand. Uh, but I think the true alignment happened from my undergrad, because there was an office on my undergraduate campus that was dedicated to helping uh, minoritized and underrepresented students make it through a predominantly white institution. And the director there at the time was just a wonderful, brilliant sister that was always checking up on me, made sure I had what I need, and I connected in to that office. And so, as I started thinking about what I wanted to do professionally and as a career, I wanted to work in higher education, and I probably went through several different careers that I wanted to have, but I ended up seeing that there was this nexus in higher education where I could really I could fulfill my want to do counseling for people that look like me and to make sure that their heads and their minds and their hearts were syncing up together. I could also fulfill my need to be entrepreneurial and create something that needed to be in the space, as well as my passion, surrounding like the idea of ministry, right? Like to have a ministry field that was kind of dedicated to me, and higher education ended up being like the intersection of all those. And more specifically, because of just how I'm built, the space surrounding ensuring that marginalized folks had um, the ability to connect in spaces where they historically haven't was huge for me, and that's kind of what took me into that work. Um, I joke though, but I think seriously, like that work actually started for me when I was a kid. I see so many different points where it happened in my life, like even the concept. I tell this as a joke. When I was a kid growing up in Mesquite, I remember, I think it was like first or second grade. Um, some kid had come to school and he was throwing rocks at me on the playground, saying things like all blacks were born in trash cans and throwing rocks at me. And I just remember um, literally picking this kid up and tossing him down the slide, right? Like tossing him down the slide, right? And so, I ended up in the principal's office, and then my mom worked at the school, so the principal was like, "You need to go to your mom's room," and you have the conversations and you tell everybody what happened, but it was like from that moment, we're not going to stand for that. We're not going to be in spaces where folks are allowed to be mistreated. Um, and so we gotta move differently. Um, and I think what this move was for me in DI is to start thinking about those small moments of mistreatment, but to look at that in a more structural and systematic way, right? Like, so what does that look like in terms of policies, procedures, and protocols where that mistreatment is written into our policies? So that's kind of what took me into that realm, and I think that's what's like kind of kept me there is being able to take it and look at it from a systems view.
Man, that's super dope, Byron. And I gotta give you your kudos for the work that you do. Cause when we work with a lot of the youth that we work with, we teach a lot of restorative justice practices, right? And within those practices is the understanding that the more you know about someone else, the less likely you are to harm that person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you tell that story about the young man that was throwing rocks at you, and you threw him down the slide, like if you guys were to just have a conversation and really get to know one another, I think that issue could have been avoided, right? Because there was just a difference in understanding at that point. But something that you've always been tremendously, that's been tremendously important to you is the underrepresented minorities and them not only appreciating their cultures, but appreciating others' cultures as well. Talk to what influences you had that led you to that. Because I know you talked a little bit about the how you got into the multicultural spaces,
Mm-hmm.
but like what led you to say, like, I don't want you to just know about where you come from, but I want you to also understand where people around you are coming from so that we can connect and have a valuable conversation and dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's that ministry churchy side, right? Like, so that's definitely the ministry churchy side of it. And I think for me, like we all have a history that's deeply connected to why we ended up to where we are, right? Like you didn't just get here on your own, right? And when we start to explore those things, there's so much that comes from that history informing our lives, right? When I can know your history, when I can know what has shaped you and what has molded you in a certain way, then I can look on your life and you can look on my life and we can look on each other's lives with an air of grace that says, you know what? All of this isn't your fault, right? Like Byron, all of this isn't on you. You know, there are some people that molded this into you, that shaped you in this way. Um, but I also think it's like this interesting idea of, and not to go like totally religious, but this idea that um, God is speaking to each of us in these incredible ways and speaking life into spaces in incredible ways. And one of the ways that he does that is through the histories that people make it through. And so I get a better picture of who God is when I'm connected with others and their stories and how those stories inform them and their lives and what they see. And I get a better picture of that for me. And so I think part of the practicing of that is I want to know you as someone that's been created by a creator at this specific time in this specific context to do what it is that you do. So I get to know something that's vastly different than anybody else. And I think that's neat, right? I think that's neat when we see how those intersections can really shape what we do. Now, from a social justice standpoint and a restorative justice standpoint, when I know your history, I see where we have points of intersection where we can do work together, right? Where uh, when I know your history and when I know, you know, where you're coming from, and I know your culture, I can say, oh my gosh, this is probably affecting you in a similar way or in this way where it's affecting me. And we can have dialogue about that and see how we can bring our energies and our strength together and our resources together to do the critical work at that time, right? We call it, you know, in the book, we would call it interest convergence. But like your when I know your culture, I know your history, I can see where our interests would potentially converge and we can do work together. Uh, um, and then I can also be mindful not to do harm because I am aware of your history. If I know that uh, you know, got an issue with, you know, being locked in closed spaces, why would I intentionally do something to put you in a closed space, right? If I know your history, well, on an individual level, that makes sense. When we think about that on a cultural level, right? If I know that culturally you've had issues in these spaces, why would I do something like that to harm you? And so it allows me to actually practice a better version of humanity.
I love that perspective, and I can tell that you really care, right? And I think that's the difference from a lot of professionals nowadays versus prior to. You are genuinely passionate about the individuals you work with, and you really want to support them in that arena. And I like that philosophy. I want to ask you: is there a way that you incorporate that just from networking and being able to build your network as of yet, right? Because you referred to the convergence, right? I heard you mention a little bit earlier about the intersections of all your passions. But I want to ask you: do you incorporate that same mentality with networking with different individuals just within the society, within the community, and really just building those relationships personally outside of the actual work in what you do?
Yeah, I think yeah, naturally, it spills over. I think one of the things that we do when we network is like, this is for me. Let me just talk for me. I'm constantly thinking about how can me and my talents and what I have in terms of resources, how can that bring you know health and success to someone else, and vice versa. How can what they bring to the table, bolster me up? Um, and I think part of that is those interest convergence. Like I I say this with my partners all the time, right? I can't like very rarely will I keep space with goofies, right? Like very rarely will I keep space with folks that don't have a sincerity about them, because that's dangerous to the work that I'm trying to do. That's dangerous to even how I maintain relationships, because I don't want people to confuse what I'm about, right? And so one of the things that we do and that I do, I think naturally, is saying, "Hey, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that moves you? What is it that um, has shaped you? And how can we connect on that?" Um, there's a group of brothers that I have had since college. Um, and the running joke is that we always tell when we get together, we always, talk and tell the same stories over and over again. And our wives hate it. They're like, okay, we heard the story. Here comes the punchline. Boom. And they're like, can we get to like some other stories or make some new ones? But the truth of the matter is, the reason we tell those same stories is because it's a constant reminder of what connected us and what strengthened us and what we made it through as a group, as a small community. And so I think when we network, we're networking with this idea that we're building community, um, not just for the community's sake, but we're building community for the health and well-being of ourselves, for times that we don't even know that are coming, right? Um, so
No, I love that because when I think about when I'm with the foundation and we're going to networking events, we do exactly what you said. Like we're trying to figure out, what are you passionate about? Does that align with what we're passionate about? And how can we help each other? Because I think that the best networking happens when there is an even exchange of it might not even be even all the time, right? But there's some form of exchange happening there. But I just want to again give you kudos, because when I think back to our time at Valpo, I think it was your influence that helped my group of friends a little bit, because I talk to Marcus about this all the time. Like I had one of the most diverse groups of friends on campus. Like, I had my African American brothers, I had my Creole brothers, I had a couple Asian friends, I had Vietnamese, Asian, same difference. But I had so many different groups of friends, and I think part of the connection that we shared was because like we would literally want to sit at a table and really get to pick the brain and understand an individual and see why they make the decisions that they make. And I think oftentimes when you find those intersections within each other, that bolsters that relationships, that helps that synergy, and then you're able to produce some super dope stuff out of that. So just got to give you your kudos in that. But um, I know that you talked about being the assistant vice provost of DEI at Carnegie Mellon. Like, what do you plan on doing in that role, or what type of work are you doing in that role that are helping continue these types of conversations?
yeah, it's a great question. First of all, thank you for the kudos. First of all, I think y'all naturally did some of that yourselves too, so y'all made life a little bit easier on me. Um, at Carnegie Mellon, my job is a little bit different, right? Like I get to situate my work at a enterprise level. So we're thinking about the entire system of Carnegie Mellon and how we think through issues of diversity. And when we say diversity, I'm talking about who is present in the spaces that's there, right? Who is physically present, who's represented. When we talk about equity, we're talking about how are people represented? Do they have the same opportunities to succeed and be successful? And then inclusion, can they come into that space as their whole selves, unapologetically them, right? And so when we think about that, we're thinking about that at an enterprise level. So I'm thinking not just at our university here in Pittsburgh that has 8 different colleges connected to it, but I'm thinking about all of our satellite campuses around the world. So our campus in California, we have one in Qatar. I literally just got back from Qatar 2 weeks ago, visiting our campus there. We have one in Rwanda, one in Spain, right? We have a whole section dedicated to the Department of Defense and our DoD contracting and stuff. So like when we think about that, we're thinking about it at an enterprise level. So what type of policies do we need to put in place to make sure folks can come holistically as themselves? And so that's where I get to situate a lot of my work. So a lot of my work and trainings and things right now are saying, how do we create an environment for not only students, but students, faculty, and staff to be effective and successful, be holistically themselves, and have an equitable experience at the institution. From, like I said, from any point of access to the institution. So whether we're talking about admissions, hiring, or promotion, all the way through them becoming alums and retirees of the institution, right? Like how are they experiencing that space? So things that we're working on are things as big as gender inclusive bathrooms, restrooms, right? Making sure that folks can, like, it seems so simple, right? But like folks can go to the bathroom and at least have a feeling of safety as they in the bathroom, right? Like that's an important bodily function, right? Like you need to be able to go to the bathroom, at least be safe in the bathroom, right? You know, things of that nature to issues of compliance, to even policies like connected to how students gain admissions to the institution, right? And how we make those selections, how we hire, right? Like who's getting a job, who's getting promoted, how we're thinking deeply and critically about that. Right now, the center that what would correlate to our multicultural center that reports up to our office, and so how is that shaped? How is that work happening? What are some of the metrics we're putting in place there? So that's kind of where the focus is. So how do I get to continue the conversation on day to day? Day to day, my conversations are directly targeted at saying, how are we shifting our environment and how are we measuring that to make sure folks are healthy and have what they need? What does that look like on a day to day for me? And this is something you've heard me say before, James. So it looks like me asking a ton of questions every single day and asking the questions that people don't want you to ask in those spaces. Right? Like, so I get to ask the questions that they're like, after, a year or so now being on campus, they're like, all right, Byron, come on and ask a question so we can realize that we don't have it together. And so and they know it's coming because I have to ask the hard question, right? And so part of it is being positioned high enough in the institution to ask those hard questions to keep the community moving forward. And then being, I think willing to ask that question even when it's not serving the identities that I have, right? Like I'm able-bodied, so I'm not, it doesn't serve me to ask about a ramp, but it's going to serve our broader community for me to ask about how we're thinking about physical disabilities and elements that have to enter that new building we're about to build, right? And so sometimes it's being willing to ask questions that will never benefit you, or the identities that you hold in that space.
So I liked a lot of what you said, right? Being very open-minded and incorporating everybody's perspective for the greater good, right? And again, that aligns with your why. That's so awesome. You were able to find a career path that aligns perfectly with your why. And again, something that a lot of people may not know about. So we'll continue to dive into the D&I. But another thing in what you said was being able to show up in spaces as yourself. And being a young Black man in corporate, I got so happy hearing you say that. And the reason being is I've worked in Sherwin-Williams where we had a conversation about people taking a knee and they want to boycott me. You know what I'm saying? Like I worked in spaces where it was uncomfortable and I had to pivot and I had to code switch and these other components. And I've also worked in a space where I was able to show up as myself and just the vibrations were so much different. So I want to really dive more into that, right? From a DE&I standpoint, I know this is something you're passionate about, but why is it so vital for people to be in a position where they can show up as them? What are the negative components that can come with that a lot of our viewers may be in right now? And how can they free themselves from that? It sounds like you were able to find a career which aligned with you. You're able to incorporate all these different components, but a lot of other individuals may not. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how they are hurting themselves in the long term.
Yeah, and I'm always careful with this conversation, right? Like, so this has been the core, like this was the core of my dissertation, right? Like, so, issues of stereotype, threat, and how it affects leadership is literally my dissertation topic. And I know you didn't know that, Marcus, but now you get into my playhouse, right? Like, I think one of the things that like we have to be careful is like everybody is in this world is like trying their best to survive. And when we think about all those histories that created an individual, right? And when I say that, we're taking like the broader like option of systems view, right? That's at play, right? Like so, mama, daddy, uncles, brother, sister, teachers, K through 12 that fed into a person's life, church, Pee Wee football. All these ideas have gone in and at least had a fingerprint on shaping someone's life, on molding them in some way, shape, or form. And then we get through all this training, all this education, all these different ideas, and then folks go into this workspace and try to be true to who they are. And at the end of the day, they're trying to be true to who they are and know at the same time, I got to be able to feed myself at the end of this day, right? Like I can't like that's true to me too, right? Like everybody's like, I want to eat today. Like that's true to me too. And so one of the things that I've come away with, especially after doing that research, was there has to be like this phenomenal level of grace with our full authentic self. Like I got to be willing to give myself some grace and say, yes, I am not in a position where I can be holistically myself because of the context that I'm in. And I'm striving to bring my work self a little bit closer to who I believe my authentic self is, right? The other way that I also think about this idea is the idea that we are way more complex than we want to give ourselves credit for, right? Your authentic self is not limited to one manifestation. You are a complex individual, right? You can navigate three different spaces. So you talked a little bit about code switching, right? Code switching is, while it's a survival technique, it's also a masterful intercultural navigational tool, right? Like so that's why it's so amazing. That's why I love like black folks, people of color in America, right? We've learned to code switch like from the time we were little, right? Mama and them used to tell us, hey, you better get in here and act like you got some sense, right? They were teaching us code switching from a really young age. But we learned this skill that we've used for survival, but it's also the same muscle that we would use as we go into other spaces, as we go into other cultures. As I travel internationally, there's a certain level of code switching that I'm able to do, right? When I'm walking um, in Qatar and I have on a thobe, which is the long white uh, robe looking piece in the Middle East with the head scarves, and I'm wearing a thobe, and people come up and talking to me in Arabic because they're like, "We figured you was one of us, right?" Like they're like, and I'm like, "No, America." They're like, "Well, you could be one of us, right?" Part of that is that code switching, and so it's a tool that serves us in a lot of ways, right? And so when we use that um, for our own good, right, to make it through a work day, right, to um, navigate a boss that may not jive with all my identities, right? When I use that for my health and my well being, I've learned not to look down on that, right? Not to be critical of that as not being someone's authentic self. They are navigating that space. Now, there does come a time in your life where I do believe, because you can exist as authentically you, and because of space, influence, style, power, all these other factors, right? You can invite people into your space that you carry with you, that is authentically made for you, right? Let me see if I could the best way I could describe this is it'd be the difference of um, I guess if I had a imaginary bubble around me that I could invite people in. That's Byron's bubble, right? And when you come in that bubble, hey, it's Byron. This is how Byron interacts. This is how Byron moves. This is how Byron shakes, right? I have my bubble. As I get more and more confident, as I grow myself as an individual, as I move to levels of just not caring about whether I have a job or not because I have sustained myself in some other ways, right? As I've moved to higher levels of freedom, not just socially, but also higher levels of freedom within myself, my bubble expands. And as my bubble expands, I now have the ability to provide space for folks to come in and experience Byron. Um, Part of that bubble was only, when I was young, that's only for family. Only family got to see all of Byron, right? But as I've grown in my capacity to hold more people near me. And as I, you know, myself become more liberated, I actually provide space for others to actually start the process of liberating themselves. And so part of the work that I do day in, day out, I believe, is by being my authentic self, is that I've expanded my bubble where whatever room I walk into, it's at least big enough to fill the room.
Man,
And
that's
so,
that's powerful. That's powerful. I didn't mean to cut you off. You had something else, so you can say.
no,
Okay, cool. But
no, that's good.
I want to say, man, first, Marcus, man, you asked some phenomenal questions. Like you asked some phenomenal questions because I saw how my brother Byron was over there really pondering it. And they say that the quality of the question will determine the quality of the answer. So kudos to you, Marcus. But Byron, like you are relatively young. Like you're super young, but you're so wise, right? And all the things that you talked about with the code switching and Byron's bubble, like that takes a certain level of self-awareness, but also confidence. Because as you know, a young brother with dreads, I have, my braids now, and you're navigating you're in academia. You know what I mean? Like, like, how does that level of confidence and self-awareness help you be your authentic self in that space? Because what I think about is, like, I'm gonna be honest, when I was at Valpo, I don't know if I would have grew my hair out because I would have thought people were looking at me a certain way. But now I'm at a point where my confidence is higher. I know who I am, I know where I come from, and this is a crown, right? So how do you have the dreads, but still impart wisdom in everything that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I I wish I had made it to this space sooner because you would have saw my hair being grown out sooner at Valpo, right? You had already graduated when I grew my hair out at Valpo, right? And one of the things that just talking about the hair alone, um, part of me growing my hair out was to provide freedom. Um, uh, uh, I don't know if you remember Ime. He played. He was on the football team, and he had he had locks. Um, he was maybe a year or two after Cody, but he was a defense.
Sounds familiar.
Idode,
Sounds familiar.
Idode,
Oh, Idota.
Idode,
Yeah,
not
yeah, 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 yeah. Idota.
Idode,
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I know
Ime,
exactly what it is. Yeah.
Ime was another student. Sorry, no, Idode. And he asked me a question once. He said, I'm about to graduate and go into, try to look for a job. He's like, should I cut? I've been growing these for a while. Should I cut these off? Because I really want to be able to have a job. And um, and it was a tough question for me because I had never experienced locks, so I couldn't talk plainly, right? Uh, but what I told him was, I said, the question you need to know is when you go into a job space, is do you want to work at a place and do you want to give your time and energy in a place that can't navigate you and your locks, right? Do you want to work in that type of context or not, right? If they have an issue, then that it's probably best. The hair is not going to be their only issue, right? And so, thinking through that. But I said to myself, I was like, you tell that young man that, but you haven't lived that. You need to live that, right? And so that was one of the inspirations of me even growing my hair out. Part of doing that, though, is to also provide freedom for others, right? So nobody can look in spaces where I exist, in spaces where I know a couple of my other brothers exist that have locks or long hair. Or, I have one brother. He rocks an afro, like he rocks his. I'm talking about this joint is I even have one brother. He still got the Jerry curl. I keep saying it's okay to let it go, but he holds on to his curl. But you can't look in the spaces where we are and say that this hairstyle is unprofessional, right? You can't look and say that this hairstyle is unintelligent. You can't look and say that it's not put together. You can't look and say this is a broke person's hairstyle, right? You can't look and say any of those things, right? When you're encountering me, right? You can't look and say, man, that guy's a thug, right? You can't look and say those things, right? So part of it is to provide freedom for our people, just to say, nah, wear your hair the way you feel comfortable, the way that represents you, the way that you want to, um, and go get your credential as well, right? Like, and I think that's what helps, right? Like, so it's part confidence, but it's part just living through it, um, and know that we're living at a time where we're freer than the generation that came before us. And so we there was someone that wore dreadlocks in academia way before Byron did, and um, I think of cats like that I saw growing up, like Lasana Hotep, that wore his locks down to his back, and but brilliant, Dr. Hotep, masterful, and so part of that is we keep building on the lives of those that came before us, that shaped and pushed back against institutions and spaces long before we did. We just keep it going so that the next generation can see it too.
That's so real, man. We got to pay it forward for the next, and that small sacrifice in what you make, is open up the door for those who follow you. And I definitely just really resonate with that conversation about being able to be yourself within these spaces. Even just going back to sales, man, being in sales, I've always believed the consumer should look like the person who's producing, right? right? You gotta, and you do that within your space. You emulate a lot of the youth in what you represent and what you're servicing, and that's beyond vital. And even when I got in the initial space, I found myself using filler words. I found myself overcompensating, And again, my manager was real enough to set me down, like, yo, like, this ain't you. And once I was able to really find my stride and I was able to incorporate me in a space that I didn't feel was traditionally created for me, I found myself thriving, right? And they had me giving speeches to others on how to be your authentic self at work. And I was like, look at this, right? But again, it all comes back to being open-minded. I'm glad you gave that advice to that young man. I know that was beyond helpful. I wish somebody would have set me down and said that as well, right? I think oftentimes we feel we have to overcompensate in spaces because of that fear, but because of that, those things we've been taught in our childhood, right? And how to maneuver certain spaces. But again, just to see you comfortable in your space and your authentic skin, man, I love it. And just kudos to you, because again, a lot of young brothers and sisters need to see it as well and know that they can do the same. But James, I know you had a comment, bro. What was your thoughts?
No, I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what you and Byron both just said, because we work with a lot of at-risk and high-risk youth. So I thought to myself, like, I always wanted to grow my hair out, but there was always this voice in the back of my head, like, they're gonna think you're a thug, especially being at a PWI and having all these tattoos that I had. And the craziest part, I remember when I was like a sophomore in college, and I was applying to Taco Bell right off campus. And I'm thinking, like, man, these folk about to call me a thug. They're not gonna hire me because I got these tattoos. And nobody ever called me a thug. Nobody ever said anything about me. But I thought that about myself. So I think that, even Idode coming to you, asking you that question, that showed him that he was aware enough of his surroundings or the climate to be like, okay, people may think this, but I'm really about that business. And for me, the growing the hair out was, I wanted to represent something to our youth, because a lot of them have dreads, right? Or they have long hair. And I wanted them to see, like, you don't have to be defined by your hairstyle, or if you have tattoos, like, you have value in these spaces. So you were spot on with saying, like, the hair doesn't define you. And there's people that have come before us that had locks or just had long hair. So I think that's super, super spot on. But yeah, man, I appreciate those words that you gave Idode, because I think anybody in a similar situation would have appreciated having somebody have their back like that.
Yeah. And just to add to that, like, I'll say this, right? There is something to be said about saying, no, we have value, right? Like, you're not just walking in there as some slouch off the street, right? Like, you're not just walking in there any kind of way, right? And you're going in there with value that you're bringing to someone else's company. If they don't want to recognize that value, kindly get up, shake their hand, walk out the door, knock the dust off your shoes, and go on to the next place, right? Or go create something of your own. Like, I am huge on this idea that we don't have to kowtow to an institution, right? And I think that's the scariest thing, right? Like, it's what happens after I've made this investment in college and I don't have the job, and I don't have one right away. What does it mean for me to go back and live at my mom and daddy's place, at my grandma and granddad's place, right? What does that mean for me? I'm nervous about all these things that could happen. And I just want to, if nothing else resonates today, I'll say this. There is something worse than that. And it's having to go through life hating your context and your situation because you have sacrificed your holistic self to fit in to someone else's picture, right? You sacrifice everything about you so that now you fit into what they have painted on their walls. And the best thing that we can do is say, you know what, I have value the way that I am, and I want to go to a place that can recognize my value, that can encourage my value, that can increase my value. Like, that's what it's about. That's what life is about, is saying, how can I go in spaces where I can increase what I can give back to the world, whether it's through this company, whether it's through my own business, whether it's through my own nonprofit, whether it's through working at someone else's nonprofit, right? I don't have to always be the CEO. I'm fine with being number two, but in that space, it better be a number two where my value is growing and I am in turn growing something that can give back to the community and give back to the world that I'm existing in. So I think that's the Achilles heel, right? That's the important piece. Is don't feel like you gotta walk into a space and be less than who you are just so you can say I satisfied this thing. I got the job, and so I can tell my people I got a job. You know,
Yeah, man. Hey, Byron, man, you talking that talk. I quoted Les Brown earlier, man. He got another great quote that goes, "The graveyard is the most rich place in the world because a lot of dreams go there to die." And, another part that I would like to add to that is, somebody trying to please somebody, man, you're gonna end up, hurt somewhere, not fulfilling your own dream. So kudos to you, man, Byron. It's been a phenomenal episode, man. We appreciate you coming in and dropping wisdom to our listeners. Real quick, if any of our listeners wanted to tap in with you, pick your brain about some knowledge, potentially, come on a visit to Carnegie Mellon University, how could they get in contact with you? How could they tap in?
yeah, definitely. So my consulting email is culture culture dot outlast outlast at gmail.com. Or you can hit me up. My Instagram is Big Argyle. Um, just all lowercase Big Argyle. It's because I wear Argyle socks still to this day, James. Um,
Yeah.
and please reach out to me, connect in with me where I can support what someone's doing or what y'all are doing. Just let me know. I look forward to it.
Appreciate that. And we'll make sure to drop all that into our show notes so that the listeners can get it. Marcus, we'll let the people know where they can find you at as well.
Again, Byron, appreciate you, man. You inspired me that DEI stepping into that space as your full self. You definitely sparked me, man, and charging me up. I love being able to have conversation like this. So thank you again. Kudos, man. But y'all can tap in with me as always at mastermind_Marcus on IG, as well as rootsmentoring.net. Check us out. We dropped the website. Tap in and let's build, family.
Hey, man, you can find me on IG at jturner0121. You can find the foundation at A Greater Good Foundation on IG. You can also find us at aggf.org. And for the podcast, you can find us on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Let's continue to grow together. Let's continue to build together. Again, this is the Let's Grow Together podcast.